Get ready to face the unknown as Quick Scare returns with tales that will make your heart race and your imagination run wild. Join us for another dose of spine-tingling horror. This is a story that happened to me, a blind person, and let me tell you, the things we can't see are often the most terrifying. It all began when I moved into a new apartment. Being blind, I rely heavily on my other senses to navigate the world, and this place seemed perfect. It was spacious, quiet, and close to everything I needed. Little did I know, I was moving into the epicenter of something far more sinister. At first, everything seemed normal. I'd wake up, have my coffee, and set out on my daily routine. But as the days went by, I started noticing peculiar things. The subtle creaks in the floorboards at odd hours, the hushed whispers that danced just at the edge of my hearing. I chalked it up to the unfamiliar sounds of a new place, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a soft tapping on my window. Now, being blind, I don't usually pay much attention to things happening outside my apartment, but this tapping was different. It was rhythmic, deliberate, and it seemed to be calling me. Against my better judgment, I felt compelled to investigate. I cautiously made my way to the window, and as I approached, the tapping intensified. It was as if whatever was out there knew I was listening. My heart raced, and my instincts screamed at me to turn away. But my curiosity got the better of me. I reached out and touched the cold glass, and that's when it happened. The tapping ceased, and in the deafening silence that followed, a voice, guttural and filled with malice, whispered, "You should have never come here." Chills ran down my spine, and a sense of dread settled over me like a heavy fog. I stumbled back, trying to make sense of what I had just heard. Was it a prank? A sick joke someone was playing on the blind guy? As days passed, the strange occurrences escalated. Objects would be moved when I was sure I left them in a certain place. I'd hear footsteps that didn't match the rhythm of my own. But the worst part was the feeling of being watched. It was an invisible gaze that bore into my very soul, and no matter where I turned, I couldn't escape it. Desperation set in, and I decided to seek help. I invited a friend over, someone I trusted, and as they walked through the door, they froze. Their face twisted in terror as they mumbled something about unseen horrors before bolting out of my apartment. Confused and scared, I reached out to the building's previous tenants, hoping for some answers. That's when I discovered the dark history of my new home. Decades ago, a malevolent force had taken root, preying on the vulnerable and driving them to madness. It was said to be invisible, lurking in the shadows, feeding on fear. The twist, my friends, is that this malevolent force thrived on visibility. The more you saw it, the stronger it became. That's why it targeted me, a blind person who couldn't witness its true form. It sought to drive me mad, to make me question my reality, and I was its unwitting victim. Armed with this newfound knowledge, I hatched a plan. I started pretending, acting as if I could see the unseen horrors that haunted my home. I spoke to it, screamed at it, and even laughed in its face, all while maintaining the facade of a sighted person. Slowly but surely, the strange occurrences dwindled. The footsteps faded, the whispers grew fainter, and the feeling of being watched lifted. It was as if the malevolent force, deprived of the fear it so desperately craved, lost its power over my reality. So here I am, sharing my tale with you all. The blind person who faced the unseen horrors and emerged victorious by playing a game of deception. But remember, dear Redditors, not everything that terrifies us can be seen with the naked eye. Sometimes the scariest things hide in the shadows of our own perceptions. I never thought I'd be sharing my story, but I need to get this off my chest. I'm blind, and what happened to me a few weeks ago still sends shivers down my spine. I can't explain it, but maybe someone out there can help me make sense of it all. It was a regular evening for me. I live alone in a small apartment, and my routine is pretty predictable. My blindness has forced me to rely on my other senses, so I navigate through life using touch, sound, and smell. That night, though, something happened that defied all explanation. I was sitting in my living room, listening to a podcast when I noticed a subtle change in the air. You know that feeling you get when someone is watching you? Well, multiply that by 10, and you might come close to the unease that washed over me. My guide dog, Max, whimpered softly, sensing my discomfort. I dismissed it at first, thinking it was just my overactive imagination. But as I continued listening to the podcast, the feeling persisted. Then, the unmistakable scent of mildew and decay hit my nose. Max began growling softly, his fur standing on end. I called out, thinking maybe a neighbor had left something in the hallway. No response. The silence that followed was more chilling than any sound could have been. I stood up, using my cane to navigate towards the front door, Max at my side. As I reached the doorway, the air seemed to grow thick, like a heavy fog. I hesitated but continued forward. The apartment building was an old one, and weird noises weren't uncommon. But this was different. It felt malicious, like the darkness itself had taken on a form. I heard a whisper, soft and barely audible. It was my name. Cold fingers ran down my spine. I was alone in my apartment, or at least I should have been. I froze, fear gripping me in its icy talons. "Who's there?" I stammered, my voice shaky. No response, just the oppressive silence. Max had gone silent too, his tail tucked between his legs. I felt a sudden chill, as if the temperature had dropped dramatically. That's when I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, and echoing in the stillness. I turned towards the sound, blindly reaching out with my hands. My fingers brushed against something, and I recoiled. It was wet, cold, and pulsating. Panic set in, and I fumbled for the light switch. As the room flooded with light, I saw a figure standing before me, or rather, a shapeless silhouette. "Who are you?" I demanded, my heart pounding. No response. The figure seemed to writhe and contort, its form shifting like shadows dancing in the moonlight. I felt a gust of wind, and suddenly, the lights went out. Pitch black surrounded me, and I was left disoriented and vulnerable. Then, a voice whispered again, this time closer, almost in my ear. "See me?" How could I see in the dark? But as the words echoed in my mind, I realized my eyes were open, and I could see, not with my eyes, but with something else. The figure became clear in my mind's eye, a grotesque entity, neither dead nor alive. I stumbled backward, realizing that whatever I was seeing wasn't meant for human eyes. Max whimpered again, a sound filled with dread. The figure seemed to feed off my fear, growing more defined, more menacing. In a desperate attempt to escape, I fumbled for my phone and called the police. As I spoke, the figure let out a guttural sound, a mixture of anguish and rage. The air thickened, and Max began barking uncontrollably. When the police arrived, the apartment was empty. No trace of the figure, no lingering scent, just an unsettling emptiness. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, probably thinking I was losing my mind. But I know what I saw. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Shadows seemed to linger, and the air retained a faint scent of decay. Max refused to enter certain rooms, his behavior signaling that something was amiss. Then, one night, as I lay in bed, I heard the whisper again, "See me." This time, it wasn't a command but a plea. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the voice, but it persisted. And then, in the darkness behind my eyelids, I saw it, the figure, tormented and trapped, I don't know what it is or how it came into my life, but I can't escape it. Every time I close my eyes, it's there, begging to be seen. I don't know if it's a ghost, a demon, or something else entirely, but I can't escape the horror that found me in the dark. Thanks for joining us in the realm of Quick Scare. If you're still recovering from the frights, show your support by liking, sharing with your fellow thrill seekers, and subscribing for more heart-pounding stories. Keep your lights on, and may your nightmares be ever so entertaining.